What if I told you that one of Real Madrid's biggest signings of 2026 once had to sleep in a house packed with 25 people, played football in plastic sandals, went through trial after trial where clubs kept telling him no, and even had to return home believing that his dream might already be over? This is not a story about a footballer who was handed everything. This is the story of YAN Diamondde. And before we get into how this young boy from Abidjan went from playing football in the dirt to becoming one of the most expensive teenagers in football history, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Because if you love untold football stories, you definitely do not want to miss what comes next. YAN Diamonde's story begins far away from the glamour of the Santiago Bernabeu. It begins in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. There was no luxury football academy waiting for him, no famous agent opening doors, no guarantee that football would become his career. There was simply a young boy who loved the game. Diamondde has spoken about growing up in a crowded home where around 25 people could be sleeping under the same roof. Life was not about expensive cars, designer clothes, or football boots. It was about family, survival, and finding happiness wherever you could. And somehow, football became his escape. At night, when everyone else was watching television, Yan would pretend to be asleep. Then after midnight, he would quietly sneak into the television room, turn the volume almost all the way down and watch football in the darkness. His hero was Cristiano Ronaldo. He didn't just want to watch Ronaldo, he wanted to become the kind of player Ronaldo was. One of the memories Diamondde later shared was particularly revealing. Someone had bought him a fake Manchester United shirt, and because he didn't have the money for an official shirt, he simply took a black marker and wrote Ronaldo 7 on the back. That shirt was enough. To a kid who had very little, it represented everything. Dreams don't always begin with money. Sometimes they begin with a football, a television screen, and the belief that one day your life can be different. But Diamondde's childhood was not only about watching football. He played it everywhere. On dirt pitches, in the streets, anywhere a ball could be kicked. The adults around him noticed something unusual. His shots were so powerful that they began calling him Roberto Carlos. But there was one problem. Yan didn't want to be Roberto Carlos. His idol was Cristiano Ronaldo, and he wanted everyone to know it. At just 9 years old, Diamondde left home to pursue football opportunities far away. Imagine that, 9 years old. A child leaving his familiar surroundings and going near the Ghanaian border to play football. He was still just a boy, but the dream was already becoming bigger than the fear. Life there was extremely difficult. Diamondde has recalled moments when he and other boys were so hungry that they would go into a nearby village and steal potatoes. They even jokingly called it a bank robbery. Two boys would distract the shopkeeper, while others would grab potatoes and run. These weren't glamorous beginnings. There were no Champions League nights, no packed stadiums, no millions of followers. Just hungry children trying to survive while chasing a dream. And then came another important moment, his first real football boots. For a boy who had spent so much time playing in plastic sandals, those boots meant everything. He even slept with them. That tells you everything about how seriously he took his dream. But football has a brutal side. Talent does not guarantee success. Sometimes talent gets rejected. Again, and again, and again. As a teenager, Diamondde traveled to the United States, hoping to impress clubs and open the next door in his career. Instead, he experienced one of the biggest disappointments of his young life. He was rejected. He tried again. Rejected again. He went through trials involving clubs and football environments in Europe and North America, but the answer seemed to remain the same. No, no, and no. Eventually, his visa expired and he had to return to Côte d'Ivoire. For a young footballer, that moment could have been the end. He had traveled so far. He had dreamed so much. And suddenly he was back home. The dream seemed to be disappearing, but there was someone who refused to let him give up. His sister, Roxane. Roxane believed in Yan before the football world did. She saw something in her little brother that other people couldn't see yet, and that belief would eventually become one of the most important forces in his life. Diamondde would later describe how Roxane encouraged him to keep working and keep believing. She didn't want him to become lazy simply because people around him believed he was talented. She pushed him. She challenged him. She reminded him that talent without work meant nothing. And then eventually another door opened. Leganés. After all the rejection, all the traveling, and all the disappointment, Diamande finally had a professional opportunity in Spain. It was the kind of moment that could change everything. And it did. He made his professional breakthrough with Leganés, and suddenly the boy who had once been rejected by clubs was playing professional football in Europe. Then came RB Leipzig. The German club saw the potential. Diamande moved to Leipzig in 2025 and began to develop at an extraordinary speed. His pace, his dribbling, his confidence, his ability to attack defenders. Everything that had once looked raw began to come together. But while his football career was rising, his personal life suffered a devastating blow. Roxane died in 2025. She was only 15. The person who had believed in him when almost nobody else did was suddenly gone. And Diamande was left with a dream that now carried an entirely different meaning. He wasn't playing only for himself anymore. He was playing for her. In June 2026, before the World Cup, Diamande wrote a deeply emotional letter to his late sister through the Players' Tribune. He called it Dear Roxane, and that letter revealed the human being behind the footballer. He remembered their childhood, the crowded house, the fake Manchester United shirt, the dirt pitches, the plastic sandals, the dreams, the hunger, the failures, and most importantly, he remembered what Roxane had told him. She believed her brother could become greater than Cristiano Ronaldo. Think about how unbelievable that sounds. A young boy with no guarantee of becoming a professional footballer, a boy playing in sandals, a boy rejected by clubs, and his sister was telling people that he could become better than Cristiano Ronaldo. At the time, it might have sounded impossible, but Yan never forgot it. He wrote that the football pitch had become the place where he felt most at home, the place where he could almost speak to his sister again. Every goal became a message. Every achievement became proof. And when Côte d'Ivoire reached the 2026 World Cup, Diamande wasn't simply going to the tournament as another young player. He was carrying Roxane's dream with him. He wanted the world to see what she had seen. And then came another chapter. The transfer market. Suddenly, the boy who had once been rejected was one of the most wanted young attackers in world football. Liverpool were interested, Paris Saint-Germain were interested, and Real Madrid were watching. The situation became one of the biggest transfer stories of the summer. For a player who had spent his childhood dreaming about the biggest stages, there was now a decision to make. Which club? Which project? Which future? And then Real Madrid entered the picture. The club that had won countless Champions League trophies. The club that had been home to Cristiano Ronaldo. The club that Diamande had dreamed about indirectly since he was a child, watching football on television. Madrid wanted him, and this time Yan had a choice. He could choose another elite European club. He could choose PSG. He could choose a different path. But he chose Real Madrid. And this was not simply about money. Real Madrid's project convinced him. The club saw him as a major part of its future. And the conversation with Jose Mourinho was also reportedly important, with Mourinho speaking to Diamande in French and explaining the project and how the young winger could fit into the team. For Diamande, this was the moment where the dream became real. The boy from Abidjan was going to Madrid, not for a trial, not to ask for an opportunity, not to hope someone would say yes. He was going there as a Real Madrid player. In August 2026, Real Madrid officially announced the signing of YAN Diamondé from RB Leipzig. The deal was reported at around 125 million euros guaranteed, potentially rising to approximately 140 million euros with add-ons. At just 19 years old, Diamande had become Real Madrid's club record signing and one of the most expensive African footballers in history. Think about that journey. From plastic sandals to the Santiago Bernabeu, from playing football in the dirt to wearing the Real Madrid shirt, from being rejected by clubs to becoming a player that some of the biggest clubs in Europe wanted, from a crowded home in Abidjan to one of the most famous football clubs on the planet. But perhaps the most powerful part of this story is that Diamande never forgot where he came from. His success did not erase his past. His past created his success. The hunger taught him resilience. The rejection taught him patience. His family taught him humility. And Roxane taught him belief. There is something almost poetic about the fact that the boy who once wrote Ronaldo 7 on a fake Manchester United shirt because he couldn't afford a real one has now arrived at the club where Cristiano Ronaldo became a global icon. But YAN Diamondé isn't going to Madrid simply to become the next Cristiano Ronaldo. He has his own story to write, and that might be the most important thing. Because football has a habit of comparing young players to legends. Every exciting teenager becomes the next Messi, the next Ronaldo, the next Mbappe. But Diamondé doesn't need to be the next anybody. He needs to be Diamondé, the boy from Abidjan, the boy who watched football secretly after midnight, the boy who played in sandals, the boy who was hungry, the boy who was rejected, the brother who lost his sister, the player who carried her belief all the way to the World Cup, and now the young man who has walked through the doors of Real Madrid. There is one line from his letter to Roxane that explains everything. He told her that he would prove she was right, or die trying. That wasn't just a football statement. That was a promise to the sister who believed before the scouts, before the agents, before the millions, before Real Madrid. And now, every time YAN Diamondé steps onto that pitch wearing white, there will be more than a footballer running down the wing. There will be a story of poverty without surrender, rejection without giving up, loss without losing the dream, and belief that survived even when the person who gave him that belief was no longer there. YAN Diamondé has already traveled farther than most young footballers ever will, but perhaps the most beautiful part of his story is that the journey is not finished. The child who once dreamed while watching football in the darkness now has the brightest stage in the world in front of him. Real Madrid, the Santiago Bernabeu, the Champions League, and a dream that began with a fake shirt in a black marker. His sister Roxane once told the world that her little brother could become the greatest. Now the world gets to find out just how far YAN Diamondé can go. Because sometimes football doesn't simply produce stars. Sometimes football gives a forgotten child a voice. And sometimes, behind every great player, there is someone whose name the world may never have known. For YAN Diamondé, that person was Roxane. And every time he scores, every time he celebrates, every time he puts on that Real Madrid shirt, her story continues with him. From Abidjan to Madrid, from sandals to the Bernabeu, from rejection to a record transfer, from a little boy dreaming in the darkness to one of football's brightest young stars. This is YAN Diamondé, and this is only the beginning.